Shepherd's Fold Church stood at the heart of Willow Creek, a picturesque town known for its cobblestone streets, blooming gardens, and the hum of friendly neighbors. At the center of this quiet life was Reverend Elias, a man who could command attention with the simplest of words. His voice was smooth, his sermons profound, and his ability to connect with the youth unmatched. Sunday mornings were a spectacle. Families filled with the wooden pews, their voices blending in hymns that reverberated through the arched ceiling. Young women especially flocked to the church eager for a chance to hear Reverend Elias' inspirational messages. They adored him, not just for his words, but for his magnetic presence. No one questioned his unwavering attention toward them. It was seen as an extension of his spiritual care. Among them was Clara Thompson, a wide-eyed 22-year-old who had grown up in the church. Clara's parents had always described her as naive, though they never meant it unkindly. She looked up to Elias, who often referred to her as his little star, a term that made her blush. She had no idea that his compliments carried a sinister edge. That Sunday, Elias' sermon was about trust. Trust is the cornerstone of our faith, he said, pacing the stage. His piercing gaze scanned the room, landing briefly on Clara. And trust begins with surrender. When we surrender ourselves completely to God, we find peace. Clara hung on every word, feeling a swirl of pride when his eyes lingered on her. It felt personal, as though the sermon were for her alone. Later after the service, Reverend Elias made a point of catching Clara outside. She was standing with her best friend, Emily, whose sharp wit often kept Clara grounded. "Clara," Elias said warmly, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder, "you've been on my mind. Could I have a word in private?" Emily frowned, sensing something off, but Clara nodded eagerly. She followed Elias to the office, unaware of Emily's worried eyes tracking them. Inside the office, Elias closed the door gently. The walls were lined with bookshelves, filled with theology texts and framed photos of church events. Clara sat awkwardly on the edge of the chair, her hands clasped in her lap. "You've been a blessing to this church," Elias began, his tone soft. "Your faith, your devotion, it's rare to see in someone your age." "Thank you, Pastor," Clara said, flushing. Elias leaned forward, his expression earnest. "You know, Clara, sometimes God calls us to deeper forms of service, special kinds of service." "What kind of service?" she asked, her brow furrowed. Elias smiled, a disarming, almost predatory smile. "That is something I would like to guide you through personally. But remember, it requires trust. Do you trust me, Clara?" Clara hesitated. Something about his tone felt strange, but she pushed the thought aside. He was the pastor. Of course she could trust him. "Yes," she said finally. Elias smiled widened. "Good. We will talk more about this soon." The sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows of Shepherd's Fold Church, casting colorful patterns on the tiled floor. Clara sat in the sanctuary, clutching her Bible. It was a weekend, and the usually bustling church was quiet. She had started coming in during the week for spiritual mentoring sessions with Reverend Elias. At first, she had been flattered by the attention, but lately, an unease had settled in her chest. Clara glanced at her phone. She had been waiting for nearly 20 minutes. Elias had texted her earlier that morning, asking her to meet him in his office for another section. Her fingers fidgeted with the pages of her Bible, but the words blurred together. The sound of footsteps snapped her out of her thought. Elias entered the room, his ever-present smile lightening up his face. "Ah, Clara," he said, his voice warm and inviting. "I'm so glad you are here. I was delayed by a meeting with the deacons." "It's okay, Pastor," Clara replied, standing up nervously. "I wasn't waiting long." He gestured for her to follow him to his office, and she obeyed, clutching her Bible tightly. The office felt smaller than usual today, the air thick with an unspoken tension. She sat in the chair opposite his desk while he leaned back in his leather chair, studying her. "You've been making wonderful progress," Elias said, his tone smooth. "Your dedication to faith is inspiring." Clara smiled hesitantly. "Thank you. I'm trying my best." Elias leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. "Do you trust me, Clara?" The question caught her off guard. "Of course I trust you, Pastor. You've always been kind to me." "Good," he said, nodding approvingly. "Because trust is the foundation of the relationship we are building. Sometimes God places people in our lives to guide us in ways we might not understand at first." Clara nodded. Though she didn't fully understand his words, his tone was soothing, but something about the way he looked at her made her feel small and exposed. That evening, Clara met her best friend Emily at their favorite coffee shop. Emily was always the practical one, with a sharp tongue and an even sharper sense of intuition. As Clara recounted her meeting with Elias, Emily's brow furrowed. "Wait," Emily interrupted, setting down her cup. "Why are you meeting him so often? What exactly are these spiritual mentoring sections about?" Clara hesitated, stirring her tea. "He is helping me grow in my faith. He says I have potential to serve in a special way." Emily narrowed her eyes. "What does that mean? And why can't he mentor you in a group setting, like he does with everyone else?" Clara shrugged, feeling defensive. "He is the pastor, Emily. He knows what he is doing." Emily leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Clara, I don't like this. It doesn't feel right. You are spending so much time alone with him. Has he said or done anything that made you uncomfortable?" Clara paused, thinking about the way he had touched her shoulder last week, a lingering hand that had sent a shiver down her spine, but she quickly dismissed the thought. He was her pastor, a man of God. He wouldn't do anything inappropriate. "No," she said firmly, "you are overthinking." Emily didn't look convinced. "Just be careful, okay? I have heard things about men in power, even pastors. They are not always what they seem." Clara rolled her eyes. "You don't know him like I do, Emily. He is a good man." "Maybe," Emily said, her tone skeptical. "But good men don't ask for blind trust." Across town, Sophia at her kitchen table staring at the untouched dinner she had prepared. Her husband, Daniel, was running late from work again. She had hoped they could spend time together, but lately their marriage felt more like a routine than a partnership. Her phone buzzed and her stomach twisted when she saw the name, Pastor Elias. "You seemed troubled during our last session. Remember, I'm always here to help. Let me know if you would like to meet again soon." Sophia's hands trembled as she set the phone down. Her counseling sessions with Elias had started innocently enough. Advice on strengthening her marriage, guidance on balancing her faith with her responsibilities. But somewhere along the way, the lines had blurred. He had a way of making her feel special, seen. It was intoxicating and terrifying all at once. "Is everything okay?" Daniel's voice startled. He had arrived home unnoticed, his tie loosened and his face weary. "Yes," she said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just a message from Pastor Elias." Daniel frowned. "You've been meeting with him a lot lately." "He's been helping me with personal things," she said, avoiding his gaze. Daniel sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. I just hope this isn't about us. If something is wrong, you should talk to me, not him. Sophia nodded, but her heart was pounding. She couldn't tell him, not yet. Over the next few weeks, the tension in the church grew. Though no one dared to speak openly, Clara continued her sessions with Elias, each one leaving her more confused and uncertain. Emily watched her friend with growing concern, determined to uncover the truth. Sophia, too, found herself caught in a web of guilt and shame. She knew she was crossing a line, but Elian's attention was addictive. Each time she tried to pull away, he would say something that drew her back in, convincing her that their connection was somehow divine. The cracks were there, growing larger with each passing day. It was only a matter of time before the facade shattered completely. The days of Shepherd's Fold Church began to feel heavier, as if the building itself carried the weight of the secrets buried within its walls. Clara sat in her room last night, staring at the ceiling. Sleep had become elusive, and the unease she had been feeling over the past few weeks was now impossible to ignore. She replayed her last session with Reverend Elias in her mind. His words, his touch, the way he had leaned in too close, it all felt wrong. But how could she reconcile this with the man everyone referred? The man she had trusted. The guilt gnawed at her like a relentless storm. The next morning, Clara decided to skip her regular visit to the church. Instead, she called Emily and asked her to meet at the usual spot by the river bank. The water sparkled under the mid-morning sun, but Clara barely noticed. She sat on the bench, her knees pulled up to her chest as Emily arrived. "What is going on?" Emily asked, sitting down beside her. "You look like you haven't slept in days." Clara hesitated, her throat tightening. Finally, she blurted out, "Something happened with Pastor Elias." Emily's eyes widened. "What do you mean something happened?" Clara took a deep breath and began to recount everything, the private sessions, the lingering touches, the way he made her feel both special and uncomfortable at the same time. Her voice cracked as she described the moment Elias had crossed a line, brushing his fingers against her cheek and whispering things that made her stomach churn. "He said it was part of my spiritual journey," Clara said, tears streaming down her face, "but it didn't feel right, Emily. It felt..." She broke off, unable to say the word. "Manipulative," Emily finished for her, her voice filled with anger. "He is grooming you, Clara. This is not okay." Clara nodded, her sobs growing louder. "What am I supposed to do? No one will believe me. He is the pastor. Everyone loves him." Emily wrapped an arm around her, her jaw clenched. "You are not alone in this. We will figure it out, but first, you need to stop seeing him. No more sections." Clara nodded again, but her fear lingered. She wasn't sure if she had the strength to face him. While Clara struggled with her turmoil, Sophia found herself spiraling deeper into her own mess. Her sessions with Elias had gone far beyond anything she could justify as spiritual counseling. She had crossed a line she never thought she would, and now the weight of her betrayal to Daniel was suffocating her. That evening, as Daniel sat at the kitchen table reading the newspaper, Sophia paced the room, her mind racing. She wanted to tell him everything, to beg for his forgiveness, but she couldn't. The fear of destroying marriage was too great. "What is wrong?" Daniel asked, looking from his paper. "Nothing," Sophia said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just tired." Daniel didn't press further, but his eyes lingered on her longer than usual. He wasn't a fool. Something was off, and he was determined to find out what. Meanwhile, Emily wasn't content to let things lie. She began discreetly asking questions around the church, talking to other young women who had also spent significant time with Elias. At first, the women were hesitant to open up, but Emily's persistence paid off. One of the women, Lily, admitted that she had stopped attending church because of Elias' behavior. He made me feel dirty. Lily confided, her voice shaking. I thought I was the only one. Emily's heart sank. You are not the only one, she assured her, but we need to do something about this. He is hurting people. Lily looked unconvinced. What can we do? He is a pastor. Everyone worships him. Emily gritted her teeth. Not for long. We will make them see the truth. The cracks in Elias' carefully constructed facade widened one evening when Sophia received a text message from him. Daniel, who had grown increasingly suspicious of her behavior, happened to see the notification. The message was brief but damning. Thinking of you. Let's meet tomorrow. Who is that from? Daniel asked, his voice tight. Sophia froze, her face pale. It's Pastor. It's just Pastor Elias. He's been helping me with some personal issues. Daniel narrowed his eyes. Helping you at this hour? What kind of pastor texts a married woman late at night? Sophia stammered, trying to come up with an explanation, but Daniel wasn't buying it. He grabbed her phone and began strolling through her messages. His face darkened as he read the thread. What is this, Sophia? He demanded, his voice rising. Are you having an affair with him? Sophia burst into tears. I didn't mean for this to happen. He manipulated me, Daniel. I was vulnerable and Daniel didn't let her finish. He stood raptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I trusted that man. He growled. I trusted you. Before Sophia could stop him, Daniel grabbed his car keys and stormed out of the house. That Sunday, Daniel arrived at the church, his anger barely contained. The congregation was gathered for the morning service, the air filled with the sound of hymns. Reverend Elias stood at the front, smiling as he greeted members of the flock, but his mouth faltered when he saw Daniel striding toward him. You hypocrite! Daniel bellowed, his voice echoing through the sanctuary. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to him. Elias raised his hands in a placating gesture. Brother Daniel, let's discuss this privately. There is nothing private about what you've done, Daniel shouted. You've been preying on women in this church, including my wife. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Murmurs broke out as the congregation tried to process what they were hearing. Elias' face hardened. These are serious accusations, Daniel. Let's not create unnecessary conflict. But Daniel wasn't backing down. Unnecessary conflict? You've destroyed lives, and I'm not the only one who knows this. At that moment, Clara stood up from her seat, her hands trembling. He is telling the truth, she said, her voice barely audible. Elias has been inappropriate with me too. The sanctuary erupted in chaos as more voices joined in. Women who had been silent for too long, the web of lies Elias had spun was finally unraveling. The fallout from the confrontation at the Shepherd's Fold Church was immediate and devastating. The sanctuary, once a place of peace and reverence, had become a battleground of accusations and disbelief. As Daniel stormed out, Clara's revelation hung in the air like a tender clap, leaving the congregation in stunned silence. Reverend Elias stood frozen at the pulpit, his usual composure cracking under the weight of the accusations. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, questions flying from all directions. Is this true? How could he do something like this? Why didn't anyone notice? But others leaped to Elias' defense. This is slander. He's a man of God. This woman must be lying. They are trying to ruin him. The once unified church split down the middle, with factions forming almost instantly. Some members demanded answers while others closed ranks around their beloved pastor, refusing to believe he was capable of such betrayal. Later that evening, Clara and Emily met with Sophia and Lily at Emily's apartment. The tension in the room was palpable. The silence broken only by the ticking of the clock. "This has gone too far," Sophia said, her voice trembling. "It's one thing for me to deal with this, but now everyone knows my marriage is falling apart." Emily leaned forward, her eyes fierce. "Your marriage isn't falling apart because of you, Sophia. It's because of him. You're not the only one he is hurt." Clara nodded, her hands clenched in her lap. "We have to tell the truth, all of it." Lily hesitated, her face pale. "What if no one believes us? He's the pastor. People will think we are making up this to ruin him." "They already think that," Emily said bluntly. "But the more of us who speak out, the harder it will be for them to ignore. We can't let him keep doing this." Sophia wiped her tears and took a deep breath. "Okay, I will tell my story, but we have to stick together." The women agreed to meet with the church elders the next day to present their case. It was terrifying prospect, but they knew it was the only way forward. The following day, the church elders board convened in the private meeting room. The air was thick with tension as Clara, Sophia, Lily and two other women sat across the panel of stern-faced men and women. Reverend Elias was notably absent, having been asked to step aside temporarily pending the investigation. Clara was the first to speak. Her voice quivered as she recounted her sessions with Elias, detailing how his behavior had grown increasingly inappropriate. She described the manipulation, the way he used scripture to justify his actions, and the guilt she had carried for weeks. Sophia followed, her story even more shocking. She admitted to the affair, but emphasized how Elias had preyed on her vulnerability, exploiting the cracks in her marriage for his own gain. By the time Lily and the other women finished sharing their experiences, the elders sat in stunned silence. "This is deeply troubling," said Elder James, the head of the board. His face was ashen. "If these accusations are true, Reverend Elias has not only broken our trust, but also betrayed his calling as a shepherd of his flock." "If these accusations are true," Emily interjected, her voice sharp, "you've heard the same pattern from multiple women. How much more proof do you need?" Elder James sighed heavily. "We will need to conduct a full investigation. This is a delicate matter and we have to proceed carefully." The women exchanged uneasy glances. They knew how easily this investigation could be swept under the rug. As word spread about the meeting, the congregation erupted into chaos. Supporters of Elias dismissed the accusations as lies and gossips, accusing the women of trying to destroy the church. Some claimed the devil was working through them to bring down a righteous man. Others, however, began to question their loyalty. Stories started to surface, small incidents that had been dismissed or ignored in the past. A young woman recalled how Elias had once lingered too long during a hug. A married couple remembered how he had insisted on private counseling session with the wife, which she had refused. The fractures widened and attendance at the church began to drop. Families who had once been inseparable now avoided one another, their bonds shattered by the scandal. Reverend Elias, meanwhile, maintained his innocence. From the confines of his home, he issued a public statement to the church social media channels. "These accusations are false and malicious," he declared, his voice steady. "I have dedicated my life to serve this church and its members. This is a coordinated attack to undermine my ministry. I ask for your prayers during this difficult time." The statement reignited the loyalty of his supporters. who began organizing rallies and prayer meetings in his honor. They plastered the town with flyers that read, "Stand with Pastor Elias, a man of God, under attack." But for the victims, the statement was a slap in their face, a denial of their pain, and a refusal to take responsibility. Among those most enraged by Elias' denial was Daniel. The betrayal he felt burnt hotter with each passing day, and he couldn't shake the image of Elias smiling smugly behind his public statement. To Daniel, it wasn't enough for Elias to lose his position. He wanted him to suffer. Late one evening, Daniel met with other husbands whose wives had been victims. Together, they devised a plan to confront Elias directly. Their anger boiled over into violent fantasies of retribution, and eventually, the idea of castrating him took root. "He doesn't deserve to walk away from this," Daniel said, his voice low and dangerous. "He's ruined lives. He should pay." The others nodded in agreement, their faces hard with determination. Emily, however, caught wind of their plan through one of the wives. Horrified, she confronted Daniel in the parking lot of the church one night. "Are you out of your mind?" she demanded. "You can't just take the law into your own hands." "This isn't about the law," Daniel snapped. "This is about justice." "Justice?" Emily shot back. "What are you planning to revenge? And it's not going to fix anything. If you go through with this, you'll be the one behind bars, not him." Daniel hesitated, the fire in his eyes flickering. "What else am I supposed to do? He can't just get away with this." "He won't," Emily said firmly. "We are building a case against him. Let the truth come out the right way, please." Daniel. After a long silence, Daniel relented, his shoulders slumping. "Fine, but if the system fails us..." Emily cut him off. "It won't. Trust me." The tension in Shepherd's Fold Church reached its boiling point. Rumors of Reverend Elias' misconduct had spread far beyond the church walls, drawing the attention of the broader community. Local newspapers picked up the story, with headlines ranging from sympathetic to accusatory. Beloved pastor faces allegations, and a community divided by scandal. But the congregation wasn't the only group on edge. Daniel, still simmering with rage, had reluctantly agreed to put his plan for revenge on hold, yet he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that justice was moving too slowly. On a Sunday morning, the church was eerily quiet. Attendance had dropped significantly, with many members staying home, unwilling to face ongoing tension. The few who attended sat in scattered groups, whispering anxiously. Elias had refused to step down from the pulpit, claiming his innocence. Despite the elders' ongoing investigation, he insisted on delivering the sermon that day. Clara sat at the back of the sanctuary with Emily, her stomach churning. She hadn't wanted to come, but Emily had convinced her to face the situation head-on. As Elias began his sermon, his voice carried a forced calmness. "Brothers and sisters," he said, his hands raised as if to bless the congregation, "we are under attack. The devil seeks to divide us, to sow seeds of doubt and discord, but we must stand firm in our faith." Clara clenched her fist. Every word felt like a knife, twisting deeper into the wound he had inflicted on her and the others. She glanced at Emily, who gave her a reassuring nod. Suddenly, the heavy doors at the back of the door swung open with a loud creak. Daniel stormed in, his face dark with fury. Gasps rippled through the congregation as all eyes turned to him. Elias faltered, his polished demeanor cracking. "Brother Daniel, this is a house of God. This is no house of God." Daniel turned it, cutting him off. "Not while you are standing here pretending to be a man of faith." The congregation sat frozen, unsure of what to do. Daniel marched down the aisle, pointing a trembling finger at Elias. You think you can stand there and preach about righteousness after everything you've done? You've destroyed lives, torn families apart, and you dare to call yourself a servant of God. Elias' face paled. These are baseless accusations, he said, his voice shaking. You are allowing anger to cloud your judgment. Daniel let out a bitter laugh. Anger? You haven't even begun to see anger. Tell them, Elias. Tell them how you preyed on my wife. Tell them how many other women you've manipulated. A murmur spread through the congregation as more people stood, their faces as a mixture of shock and anger. Some called for calm, while others demanded answers. Clara couldn't hold back any longer. She stood up, her voice trembling but loud enough to carry across the room. He is telling the truth. Reverend Elias hurt me too. Another voice joined hers, Lily's, and me. One by one, more women raised their voices, merging into a chorus of accusations. The weight of their collective testimony crushed any remaining semblance of doubt. Elias stumbled back, his confidence unraveling. This is a coordinated attack, he stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. These women are lying. They are being influenced. No one influenced us, Clara said firmly. You used your position to manipulate and hurt us. You don't belong here. The elders seated at the front of the church exchanged grim looks. Elder James finally stood, his voice heavy with authority. Reverend Elias, he said, effective immediately. You are relieved of your duties. This church will not stand by while these allegations are investigated. Elias' face twisted in fury. You are making a mistake. I have given my life to this church, and you've betrayed it. Elder James replied, Now, leave. Elias hesitated, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for Alice, but even his stern-chested supporters avoided his gaze. With a defeated slump of his shoulders, he stepped down from the pulpit and workhouse of the church. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. The women formally filed police report detailing the abuse they had endured. Investigators interviewed them and combed through the church records, uncovering a trail of misconduct that stretched back years. The media descended on the town, turning Shepherd's Fold into a spectacle. The once respected church became a symbol of betrayal, its reputation tarnished beyond recognition. Clara struggled with the newfound attention. Reporters ordered her for interviews, while strangers approached her with questions and unsolicited advice. Emily remained by her side, acting as her shield and voice of reasoning. You are brave, Emily told her one evening as they sat together in Clara's apartment. What you did today is going to help so many people. Clara nodded. Though the weight of her decision still pressed heavily on her, I just want it to be over, she said quietly. It will be, Emily assured her, but you've already won. He's not untouchable anymore. Daniel, meanwhile, wrestled with his own demons. His anger had not subsided, but he knew Emily was right. Justice needed to come through the proper channels. He focused his energy on supporting Sophia, who was working to rebuild their fractured marriage. Sophia, too, was on the path of healing. She had begun seeing a therapist and had joined a support group with other victims. Though the road ahead was long, she felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in months. A week later, Reverend Elias was arrested. The charges against him included abuse of power, sexual misconduct, and coercion. The image of him being led away in handcuffs was splashed across every news outlet, a stark contrast to the man who has once been referred as a spiritual father. For the victims, the arrest marked the beginning of a new chapter. While the scars of their experiences would never fully fade, they found strength in one another and in the knowledge that Elias would finally face the consequences of his actions. The arrest of Reverend Elias brought a wave of relief to some and bitter outrage to others. For the victims, it was a step toward justice. For his staunch supporters, it was an unforgivable attack on a man they believed was innocent. Protests erupted outside the police station, with a group of loyal congregants holding signs that read, "Free Pastor Elias," and "The devil is in the lies." However, the anger simmering beneath the surface wasn't confined to Elias' defendants. Daniel, Sophia's husband, was still consumed by rage. The sight of Elias being escorted to jail had done little to quell his fury. To him, prison was too lenient for the man who had ruined his marriage and shattered countless lives. Late one evening, Daniel met with two other husbands whose wives had also fallen victim to Elias. They gathered in a dimly lit bar on the outskirts of the town, their faces etched with bitterness. "We can't let him get away with this," said Marcus. Those whose wife had been manipulated into a similar destructive relationship with Elias. "Prison won't be enough. He deserves to feel the pain he caused." "What are you suggesting?" asked Thomas, a quieter man whose anger simmered just beneath the surface. Marcus leaned forward, his voice low. "We make him pay, physically. Something he will never forget." Daniel clenched his jaw, torn between the need for revenge and warning Emily had given him. "What do you have in mind?" Marcus hesitated, then said blatantly, "We castrate him. Take away the weapon he used to destroy our lives." A heavy silence fell over the table. Thomas looked away, his hands trembling. Daniel stared into his drink, his thoughts racing. The idea was barbaric, yet a part of him found it satisfying. He doesn't deserve to walk around like a free man, even if he is behind bars. Marcus pressed, "We need to do this for our wives and for ourselves." Emily had been keeping a close eye on Daniel, suspecting that his anger might drive him to do something reckless. When she overheard whispers of husband's plan from one of the wives, she confronted Daniel immediately. "You can't do this," Emily said, cornering him in the parking lot of the grocery store. Daniel stiffened, his face darkened. "You don't understand, Emily. This isn't about revenge. It's about justice." "Justice?" Emily snapped. "You think mutilating him is justice? That is not going to fix what he did. It will just ruin your life too." Daniel glared at her. "So what? I'm supposed to sit back and let the system handle it. What if he gets off easy? What if he does this to someone else?" Emily's expression softened. "I get it, Daniel. I do. But think about Sophia. Think about your kids, your future. If you go through with this, you will destroy everything you are trying to protect." Daniel's shoulders sagged, the weight of her words sinking in. "It's not fair," he muttered. "He gets to live his life even if it's behind bars. Meanwhile, we are left picking up the pieces." "I know it's not fair," Emily said gently. "But the best way to win is to let the truth destroy him, not you." Despite Emily's intervention, Marcus was unwilling to back down. One night, he and Thomas decided to act without Daniel, driving to Elias' temporary holding location at the county jail. Their plan was simple: catch him being transported to court, overpower the guards, and carry out their grim revenge. However, their plans unraveled when a patrol officer spotted their suspicious vehicle idling near the transport route. The officer approached, and Marcus panicked, leading to a brief but chaotic chase. Both men were arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit assault. News of the attempted attack spread quickly, further diving the town. Some saw the husbands as vigilantes, acting out of righteous anger, while others condemned their actions as barbaric and reckless. Daniel, upon hearing of the failed plan, felt a strange mix of relief and guilt. He had been moments away from joining them that night, but had stayed home after a long conversation with Sophia. The trial of Reverend Elias began 2 weeks later, drawing national attention. The courtroom was packed with reporters, supporters, and detractors alike. Clara, Sophia, Lily, and the other victims sat together, their faces pale but resolute. The prosecution painted a damning picture of Elias as a manipulative predator who had abused his position of power for years. They presented text messages, emails, and the women's testimonies as evidence, leaving little room for doubt. Elias' defense attorney tried to discredit the victims, accusing them of exaggerating their stories or seeking attention, but the victims stood firm, their voices steady as they recounted the trauma they had endured. Clara's testimony was particularly powerful. She spoke openly about her confusion, guilt, and eventual realization that she had been manipulated. "I trusted him," she said, her voice cracking. "He used that trust to hurt me." Sophia's testimony was equally heart-wrenching. She described the toll Elias' actions had taken on her marriage and her mental health. "I thought he was helping me," she said, "but he was tearing me apart." After weeks of emotional testimony and heated arguments, the jury reached a verdict. Reverend Elias was found guilty on multiple counts, including abuse of power, coercion, and sexual misconduct. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison without the possibility of parole. For the victims, the verdict was a bittersweet victory. It couldn't erase the pain they had endured, but it was a step toward healing. With Elias behind bars, Shepherd's Fold Church began the slow process of rebuilding. The elders stepped down, acknowledging their failure to protect the congregation, and new leadership was brought in. A female pastor known for her compassion and integrity was appointed to guide the church through its recovery. Clara, Sophia, and the other women formed a support group meeting regularly to share their experiences and encourage one another. Over time, they found strength in their solidarity, reclaiming their power and dignity. Daniel and Sophia began attending counseling together, determined to rebuild their marriage. It was a long and difficult journey, but for the first time, they felt hopeful.
This story is not just about betrayal. It's about resilience, accountability, and the strength of a community. It's a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable pain, healing is possible when we stand together and refuse to let silence prevail. Through the courage of the victims, the actions of allies like Emily, and the determination of a town to rebuild, Shepherd's Fold Church transformed from a site of tragedy into a symbol of renewal. While the scars of the past remain, they serve as a powerful reminder. Trust is sacred, but it must never be blind. Let this story inspire us all to speak out against injustice, hold leaders accountable, and most importantly, find hope even in the darkest times. Healing is not a straight path, but with faith, courage, and community, it's a journey worth taking. Thank you all for watching, and please do what to hit the subscribe button, like the video, and share it.